welcome to the Acid Trash Jamboree, and to another episode of the Piercing Frequencies mini-series, where we take a look at an assortment of underground noise, industrial and power electronics releases. Up for discussion today are a couple of vintage acts who started doing their thing way back when and are still active to this day, and one artist from more recent times who hasn't put anything new out in ages. Okay, there's tons to get through, so let's get stuck in. So we kick off with Ashley C's Timeless Reality, released on CD by Freak Animal Records in 2011. Ashley C, sometimes known as Ashley Choke, is or was an alias of Danish noisemaker Klaus Høyer Hansen, who started off in music in the late 2000s, releasing a clutch of tapes via labels like Posh Isolation, under numerous names, though Ashley C is probably the one he's best known for. Timeless Reality consists of 6 untitled pieces, most of which are pretty lengthy, 5 of them clocking in between 6 and 11 minutes each. After an intro of obscure bassy pulsing, the album gets going properly with the second piece, building from ultra-flanged out layers of muffled synth warp, Hansen gradually building the tension with increasingly distorted scrapings, before bursting into life with a filthy sonic whirlwind of groaning mic feedback and scrap metal abuse. He keeps things mostly pretty low-key and atmospheric on the next piece, pitting a loop of ear-tickling mic whistle against further rusted metallic grumblings and Friday the 13th-styled echoed stings. Piece 4, the first of 2 double-digit epics here, follows a similar pattern to the second one, with a few minutes of lo-fi rumbling, giving way to another violent explosion of metal thwacking and sickly, warbling old-school power electronics-esque mic screech, until a huge glob of bass-heavy synth crud drops in and causes everything to crap out, the piece ending with a bit more of that fractured banging and clanging. The 5th piece is another much quieter affair, more on the industrial side of things, with endless waves of thoroughly neighbour-unfriendly sub-bass throbbing away as Hansen once again cracks open his toolbox to coax some satisfying sonorities out of his junk metal collection. Now, the 6th piece is the longest one here, and unfortunately I'd say it's the weakest one, with Hansen lazily tossing random spasms of metal trashing on top of a strictly rhythmic synth loop. The 2 elements missing each other by a mile, and things just getting messier the more noise he piles on top of the bloody thing, as if he's trying and failing to drown it out. Yeah, this is one of my pet hates, actually. I mean, there is a way to combine free-form and rhythmic parts to good effect, but this isn't it. So yeah, a disappointing end to what is otherwise a fairly solid album. Your mileage may vary, of course, with the last piece. It's just too haphazardly chucked together for my taste. Onto a clutch of releases by the legendary Maurizio Bianchi, also known as MB. For the uninitiated, Bianchi is considered one of the pioneers of noise and industrial music, starting off in the late 70s, initially releasing 4 very interesting tapes under the alias Sasha Pels, before starting to use his real name in 1980, after which the creative floodgates well and truly opened. As you might be able to work out, this Technology 1 and 2 double CD from At War with False Noise, the first part of their MB archive series, consists of the 4 absolutely gargantuan pieces that made up the pair of Technology albums, originally released separately on cassette in 1981, chucking in a short bonus track for good measure. Technology 1 actually starts off fairly melodically with somber, near-funereal synth melodies played against terrifyingly tactile sheets of grainy noise. This extended intro eventually gives way to bowel-churning droning loopage and intimidating air raid siren wailing, the whole thing soon breaking down into deafening freeform abstraction, which starts off effectively but gets sloppier and more unfocused the longer it runs. Anyways, after this mostly pretty orderly beginning, The second piece has more of a throw everything at the wall improv approach, Bianchi occasionally missing the mark, again for my taste at least, with a few unintentionally comical sounds which sound a bit like he's playing Space Invaders through a Marshall stack. I suppose these fit in with the whole technology theme, but they do still sound a bit daft, chirping away in the midst of all the industrialised darkness and gloom. At the 19-minute mark, a different performance cuts in, consisting of sickening layers of needle-sharp feedback frequencies, along yet more hyperactive synth trashing. This part bringing things a bit more in line with the early power electronics of Whitehouse and Company. Disc 2, Technology 2, is moodier and even more lo-fi than its predecessor. The first piece cruising by on a succession of primitive, throbbing gristle-style drum machine beats which run underneath and are occasionally subsumed completely by endless waves of gross, bassy synth noise. The sound occasionally opening out into treblier vistas before being swallowed up again by the farty murk. The old-school computer game noises do crop up again at times, but they're employed a lot more subtly here and don't distract too much. The second piece is even more explicitly rhythmic, shuffling along robotically in a bleak dystopian haze, though here the beats are pushed way more up front than before, until Bianchi starts up with another anti-hero synth solo, noodling around naively for a short time, before getting bored and going on a knob-twiddling freak-out rampage for the remainder. The bonus track is a fraction of the length of the main pieces, but manages to pack quite a lot of action into its 4 minutes. By the sounds of things, it's made up mostly of very lo-fi field recordings, starting with the sound of a jet engine flying overhead, then moving into factory clatter overlaid with a low synth drone, before concluding with yet more of that thunderous plane noise. Okay, on to the second MB Archive series double disc monster from At War with False Noise. This one compiling the albums Computers S.P.A. and Com.SA, 2 tapes that first came out in 1980, so the year before the last ones. And yeah, the title of the first disc pretty much confirms what sounds we're subjected to here. Yep, the freaky Space Invaders noises are back though. This time, they're there from the get-go, hot as hell, bleeping and tweedling away angrily, albeit with a few interludes of more bassy, industrialised sonorities coming to the fore after the 10-minute mark. There's also a squelchy, proto-acid techno section that plays out towards the end, but yeah, otherwise, this sounds a lot like being trapped inside an amusement arcade from your worst nightmares, whilst the entire Konrad Schnitzler discography plays simultaneously in the background. Admittedly, I still find some of the sounds unintentionally amusing, if not flat out ridiculous, but as I said, the fact that here they're the main focus, instead of popping up out of nowhere like on the technology piece, makes all the difference. Bianchi dials down the Space Invaders influence on the second piece, to begin with at least, mostly focusing on aggressive twittering sounds and extra farty bass abuse, until further acid squelching takes command. The re-emerging arcade game noises, blending with them rather nicely. At around the halfway mark, the performance cuts out completely though. Within seconds, MB is cooking on gas again with a super blown out low end, giving your speakers a thorough workout. He then applies a fast tremolo effect to the synths, giving things a nicely energetic sci-fi soundtrack vibe, until yet another performance is spliced in, by which point it's back to the 8-bit sonics, though by now the relentless synth assault starts to wear a bit thin. Yeah, once again, Bianchi's dedication to filling out every second of a C60 tape can be trying to say the least. Okay, so on to Com.SA, which takes up all of disc 2. Now, after the all-out aural attack that was Computers S.P.A, overall, this one is a more subdued, less ear-punishing affair, starting off with lo-fi industrial pulsing and the kind of high-pitched twitterings heard on 1001 Klaus Schulze intros. Eventually, the piece gains some momentum, with Bianchi alternating between computerized motorbike revving noises and minimalist electronic throbbing, which soon coalesces into rhythmic helicopter-style chugging. The piece never really gets too busy across the course of its 25 minutes, though, with just 2 or 3 layers of sound playing at any given time. Things occasionally quietening down to near silence in its second half. Though towards the end, MB locks in with another stretch of proto-techno, which gives things a lift for definite. Track 2 then picks up right where the first one ended, with circuit-bent synth noise wheedling away over the thumping beat, which soon disintegrates into yet more high tweeting sounds. Bianchi then dialing things back down again, moving through a succession of depressive half melodies, after which all bets are off. Yeah, from this point on, he melts amorphously through so many textures and tonalities that it's actually pretty futile to even try to keep up. From farty grumbling to white noise fizzing and psychedelic phasing, then closing out with a bit of Kraftwerk on crack synth riffing, and a veritable explosion of arcade game chaos, MB evidently unable to suppress his urge to bring the noise any longer. So yeah, another good one. Again, the argument could be made that we perhaps didn't quite need all of it, but if you're an old school synth freak like me, then you're going to lap most of this up regardless. Okay, so after those lesser known cassette album reissues, here's one of MB's more popular works, Regel from 1982, which initially came out on LP, before being reissued a few times down the decades on CD, cassette, and again most recently as an LP. This one finds MB somewhere between filthy lo-fi industrial squalor and cosmic spaciness, the first piece being the more happening of the 2 original side-long offerings, opening with con-style, blooping spaceship sounds, stacked up against grainy synth grinding. He then picks up the pace somewhat, piling on high-pitched chirps and tweets, things inevitably going into Space Invaders territory for a while, after which it's back to the layered, gritty grinding for a fair chunk of time, with Bianchi's fuzzy sustained synth chords threatening to take us into doom metal territory at one point, until gross waves of putrid, watery electronics wash us towards the track's conclusion. Just going back to technology a second, another reviewer noticed that sections of that album are recycled during this Regel piece, collaged with bits of other albums as well as fresh sounds to make up a new composition. Yeah, along with MB's contemporaries like S.P.A, Nurse with Wound and the new Blockaders, the aforementioned Mr. Schnitzler in particular was no stranger to this practice, with familiar sounds showing up time and time again on scores of his albums. Anyways, in contrast to this restless audio assault, the second track is much quieter, operating in a sonic zone reminiscent of Affenstunde, the first album by Popol Vuh, albeit still ripe with that grey urban wasteland vibe. Bianchi teasing out simple synth harmonies as bleaked out ring modulator drones hum away in the background like hovering UFOs. He does raise the volume levels on a few occasions, which prevents the performance stagnating or getting too long in the tooth, all the while stopping short of descending into pure noise. That said, I might be wrong, but the CD bonus track here, Acido Prussico, which originally came out on the Broken Flag vinyl compilation Neuengamme, also from 1982, sounds very much like it could be a tape-warped and fuzzed-out remix of an excerpt from the very piece we've just heard. So yeah, good stuff on the whole from this quick snapshot of the first wave of MB's music. As I said, some parts probably could have done with a little bit of pruning, but otherwise, this is mostly worth checking out. Okay, so they're not noise or industrial, but I also wanted to touch on these additional Bianchi albums that I've been revisiting lately. First Day, Last Day from 1999, Dead Colours from 2003, and The Self-Portrait of MB from 2008. As many of you will already know, after churning out countless releases during that initial burst of creativity, in late 1983, Bianchi actually dropped out of music altogether and became a Jehovah's Witness, only returning to the fold in 1998 with an album entitled Colori, on which he introduced a more new-agey ambient sound. First Day, Last Day was the follow-up to this comeback album, released in June 1999. Here, Bianchi mostly explores the harmonic possibilities of the white keys on his synth, piling up endless configurations of cluster chords in a free-flowing, improvisational way, which occasionally come together nicely but oftentimes fall short and end up sounding like a bit of a soupy, meandering mess. The grey, cloudy synth pad that he uses throughout also gets a bit tiresome over the course of this very long album, though the closing piece, Last Day, at least adds a melodic top line to proceedings and thus a splash of colour, the whole thing unfurling into an ecstatic 12-minute minimalist reverie. Onto Dead Colours, originally self-released on CDR in 2003 but later reissued as a regular CD in 2008. Again, this one comprises mostly of cloudy synth textures, playing melancholic chordal clusters on the white keys, though overall, whilst they still carry the improvised feel of First Day, Last Day, the pieces on Dead Colours are more traditionally pretty and harmonious, for the most part avoiding the dissatisfying nothing stretches of that album and also adding in more foreground sounds like simulated piano, harp and vibraphone patches. Yeah, this one is much more of an engaging listen for my tastes and would make the perfect soundtrack for the next time you're morosely sitting and staring out of the window on a rainy day. Now, it would seem that 2008's The Self-Portrait of MB is part of the same so-called absurd trilogy as Dead Colours, and yeah, as I got deeper into the CD, I began to hear the link. Some of the pieces sounding suspiciously like the Dead Colours material, fighting for air beneath Bianchi's watery psychedelic treatments. The rest of the tracks are simple but atmospheric drone works, some light and airy with an almost raga feel, others rather dark and dissonant, the most expansive of which is the near 20-minute closing epic, with its singing, ringing metallic textures, again fed through assorted phases and flanges, which create glowing halos of overtones around the otherwise rather thin-sounding central drone. So yeah, as I said, not noise, but I thought I'd mention these three anyway, just to give a quick flavour of MB's music since he came back from retirement. We finish with two albums by Blackhouse, a project headed up by Brian Ladd, who also goes by the names Roger Farrell, Sterling Cross and Ivo Cutler, not to be confused of course with Ivor Cutler, John Peel's favourite harmonium-playing Scottish eccentric. Now, as an antidote to the confrontational, controversial likes of Throbbing Gristle, Sutcliffe Ugend and, of course, Whitehouse, Ladd intended for Blackhouse to focus on more positive, less nihilistic subject matter, while still taking influence from their harsh, extreme sounds. So yeah, basically we're talking Christian-themed artwork and lyrics here. Not that the words are particularly easy to make out for the most part, but yeah, if you like your noise as Jesus-free as possible, then you might want to give Blackhouse a miss. Anyways, Hope Like a Candle was the second Blackhouse full-length, initially coming out on both LP and cassette in 1985, before Dark Vinyl Records reissued it on CD in 1992. With the tracks segueing into one another to form two extended suites. As I suggested a second ago, musically this is smack bang between early power electronics and the rhythmic end of industrial, with many of the pieces comprising of hot-wired electronic beats, playing alongside ultra-overdriven metal smashing, all overlaid with a ton of ear-killing mic whistling and quite a lot of vocal work too. The vocal stylings alternate between a deadpan, almost proto-Marilyn Manson-style lethargic croak and a more frenzied, William Bennett-derived delivery, the best example of which can be found on the 1-2 punch of What Do You Know About Me and Roger Wasn't during the first half of the record, where Ladd just about sounds like he's foaming at the mouth. Overall, though, whilst contemporaneous White House music remains thoroughly weird, alien and disturbing, nigh on unlistenable a lot of the time, in Blackhouse, as I said, Ladd combines the old-school power electronic sound with recognisable rhythms, some of them borderline danceable, bringing to mind Throbbing Gristle and S.P.K's more song-based work, and, of course, Einstürzende Neubauten's metallic junkyard bashing. That's not to say that this is some bland, safe, watered-down alternative to that early 80s wave of depravity and nastiness. Nah, far from it. Yeah, stick this album on for 99.9% of the noise-hating general public and it'd still send them running away screaming with bleeding ears, even 40 years after its first release, so nothing to worry about there. Finally, we have 5 Minutes After I Die from 1986, which is perhaps tied with Hope Like a Candle as the best-known Blackhouse album. Now, after the near-relentless sonic barrage of said predecessor, this is a much more nuanced, dynamic and diverse release overall, opening with the epic multi-part title track which breaks up its aggro, rhythmic song sections with stretches of distorted TV samples and bits of freeform, metal clanking abandon, before closing out with an extended dark ambient piece, replete with tinkling wind chimes, which is a sound you don't hear much in the fields of noise, industrial and power electronics, that's for sure. Whilst the remaining pieces are indexed 2 to 7 on the CD, as with the previous album, they're segued seamlessly into an extended suite, following in a similar manner to the first track, with Ladd's abstracted driftings eventually exploding into in-your-face industrial bangers when you least expect it. The record closes with a 12-minute reprise of the title track, which is kind of like a minimal synth inversion of the original, gradually getting quieter and quieter until all that's left is a barely audible pulsing. So yeah, whilst overall it's way less intense and ear-punishing than Hope Like a Candle, with only a fraction of the high feedback screeching and Ladd placing more of a focus on building tension and atmosphere, certainly the more experimental of the two albums, therefore may take a few more listens for you to plumb its dark sonic depths. I'll be honest, I actually remember being a bit disappointed when I first got these Blackhouse CDs a few years back, though I can't recall exactly why. I don't know, maybe I wasn't in the mood for the more accessible industrial side of Ladd's music at the time and was hoping for something less structured and more feral. Whatever the case, listening again now though, I actually really enjoyed them, so yeah, that's good. Just taking it back to Maurizio Bianchi a second, funnily enough he teamed up with Blackhouse for a split LP a few years back though, I'm yet to hear it unfortunately. Okay, so that winds up another episode, the longest one to date. Hopefully I've managed to hold your interest till the end and maybe given you some stuff to check out or revisit in the process. As I always say, there's loads more content about experimental and underground music in the works, so please do consider subscribing if that sounds your thing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next edition of the Acid Trash Jamboree.